These days, China is very much in the minds of Koreans. That's because of its economic retaliation against a political issue, THAAD, the missile defense system that's designed to protect South Korea from North Korea's threat. On that, many believe China can do so because of South Korea's economic dependency on China. Then, how extensive is that dependency, and what can we do about it? We'll discuss all those and more right here in this program, Upfront.
In July 2016, South Korea's defense ministry announced its plan to deploy the U.S. missile defense system THAAD in Seongju, Gyeongsang-buk-do province. China voiced strong opposition to the plan, urging South Korea to immediately stop the THAAD deployment. It said the THAAD system would not help denuclearize the Korean peninsula, adding it would pose a direct threat to China. As South Korea and the U.S. pushed forward with the planned deployment, China started a campaign of economic retaliation in response. It banned imports of South Korean cosmetics and extended anti-dumping tariffs against its optical fibers. Other retaliatory measures included boycotts of South Korean companies, especially against Lotte, which signed a land swap agreement for the THAAD site. There were also suspension orders for more than half of Lotte's supermarkets in China due to alleged safety problems. In addition, China ordered its travel agencies to stop selling group tour packages to South Korea, which resulted in more than a 60% drop in Chinese tourists visiting South Korea. China's growing retaliations are expected to cost the South Korean economy up to $15 billion. South Korea is heavily dependent on China, with China accounting for 25% of its exports. There is a growing call for South Korea to find new markets and reduce its economic dependence on China. On this week's Upfront, we examine what the Chinese market means for the South Korean economy and discuss ways to ease dependence on China.
Well, for today's discussion, we have two guests in studio. On my left-hand side, Professor Yong-june. He is the Dean of the Graduate School of China at Sungkyunkwan University, joining us. Thank you very much. And on my right-hand side, Professor Jun-seok. He's an economics professor at the Catholic University of Korea. Thank you very much for joining us.
Happy to be here.
Very important issue. Everybody's thinking about it these days. And overall, however, we don't seem to have a clear, really specific idea about what this economic dependency on China actually is. Some people say it's 25% of Korea's exports, and there are people who are saying it goes much beyond that. What can we say in terms of overall landscape of the so-called dependency?
Okay, well, Korea, the exports are approximately 50% of Korea's GDP, and export to China is about a quarter of it. So in a sense, export to China is about 13% of Korea's GDP, which is obviously a very huge number.
Okay.
But I think it's sort of a case of mutual dependency, at least for now, because about three-quarters of what we export to China are intermediate goods. So
the goods that China uses for their own exports.
Their own exports or their own goods which they sell domestically. So similar to the relationship we have with Japan, where we have to import some technologically advanced parts from Japan, China, at least for now, has to import certain parts from Korea. There's obviously there's other places that they can go, but it's not as cheap and it's not as good quality.
Mutual dependency is what Professor Yang has in mind. Professor Kim, in your mind, what does this dependency look like, basically? I mean, he said mutual dependency is a very important point that we tend to miss.
Yeah.
And what are the other elements? Overall?
If you look at the global total GDP, is about $7 billion. China is about 12 to 13 billion dollars, which is 17% of total global economy.
Right.
Now we have 25% of trade, import to export targeted toward China.
Right.
I don't think it's abnormal. 25% is relatively okay considering the location-wise, considering economic, the complementarity between China and Korea. So 25% is okay.
I agree mostly with Professor Kim. If you plot out the actual numbers of Korean exports to major countries,
Right.
If you compare, say, United States, which, as you mentioned, was our biggest trading partner in 1990s,
Right.
one thing that hits you is that the trend hasn't really changed very much. If you look at the growth of the numbers, then it's fairly similar. I mean, obviously, there's year-to-year differences, but it's a trend is fairly similar since 1980s. But what has really changed is suddenly in the late 90s, China comes in and China has grown tremendously.
Right.
Partially, I think it's because China, when it was a truly communist country,
Right.
it had no exports at all, and now it's finding its place. But as they find their place in the global economy,
Right.
it caught up very quickly. So I think that gave us the impression that this large growth will go on forever. But eventually, as soon as China sort of finds its place in the global economy, I don't think it's there yet.
So you agree with him on the point that we're not at our peak in terms of our dependency on China. The peak we have already passed, basically, has been decreasing, would you say, or stabilizing?
If you look at some of the other major countries and the share of, say, their top two export destinations,
Right.
China is on the high side. Korea's exports to China is 25%, US is 14%. So about 35-40% of the share goes to the two largest
Right.
partners.
Right.
And that's similar across similar in the United States, similar for China, similar for Japan. But the balance is, I think, a bit skewed. Other countries, the largest trading partner is in the very high teens
Right.
or very low 20s.
Right.
So in that sense, we're maybe slightly skewed,
Slightly on the,
but
okay.
not that much.
Okay, so it's not that serious.
And it may be skewed because we're so close to China. Distance-wise.
Professor Kim, the impact on Korea, a lot of people are concerned about it. There are different views about that. In your assessment, what has been the damage that Korea has suffered as a result of Korea's retaliation in this case?
Okay. When China's retaliating on this third issue on the Korean economy, over the last 6 months, China economy or China consumers and China travelers to Korea
Right.
impact on us a lot. But if you look at the total trade volume or economic relationship between China and Korea, that's a very the appealing attack. So it get all the attention from the people.
Right.
But the core of economic relationship between China and Korea is those products which are making a lot of money,
Right.
especially on those semiconductors,
Manufacturing side.
manufacturing side, parts, and the oils and the gas. There is no report on economic retaliation, any of the non-tariff tax, or any of the tax issues, or any of the imports barrier. However, recent Xi Jinping and the Trump meeting, then what's really going on in terms of a political issue or
Right.
military issues are very uncertain.
Okay.
Therefore, a lot of Chinese retailers and the producers are not quite certain what they're going to do in terms of a Korean brand and the Korean product.
Okay.
So if there is a decision from the Chinese Communist Party, what they're going to do in terms of these economic retaliation,
Right.
I think it will be clear up.
Okay.
And still we have about 5% chance Chinese Communist Party make announcement we're going to have legal action in terms of retaliation.
That's something in the future, but that's a very interesting point, however. About Korean companies' response to this, what are the options we have seen so far?
Okay, in that sense, the Korean companies don't really have a lot of leverage because a lot of these companies which are affected are small and medium-sized companies.
Right.
On the other hand, if you look at the industry as a whole, then it's questionable how much they actually have been affected. So, for example, a lot of their retaliation has been concentrated on cosmetics.
Okay.
And obviously some companies are in big trouble over this, mostly companies which concentrate their exports on China. But exports for the cosmetics as a whole, if you look at the first quarter of this year, actually went up because
Overall global sales, you were saying?
Global sales, yes.
I see.
And then for the exports, first quarter of this year compared to first quarter of last year, export to China went up by 17%.
I see.
So it's very limited number of companies which are getting affected by the retaliation. And I think a lot of those companies are small and medium-sized companies, so they do not have leverage for retaliation.
Right.
So this actually is a role for government that they can take.
Sure.
If the government takes explicit government intervention for the retaliation, then this may be unfair, but we may be going against WTO rules. That's why China keeps on mentioning that it's not they're doing that there's a retaliation, it's the citizens.
But there is a strong view inside Korea, no matter what, whatever the legal merit of this case would be because of the specific details of WTO, it's our duty to take this case to WTO in order to let the world know about what China is doing. We have to move on for the interest of time, and here we want to take a look at the video of our interviews on the street because, as I said, many Koreans are very much concerned about what's happening here, and view seems to be divided. Some people believe this could actually continue on for quite some time and would have a very serious damage on Korea, and some other people say, that will be not the case. So let's hear the voices of Korean people here, and then we'll get back to their points with our guests. So let's take a look.
A row is brewing between South Korea and China, the two close economic partners. More than 80% of Koreans believe China's economic retaliation has taken a toll on the South Korean economy. The impact is largely being felt in sectors trading with China. What do Koreans think about the current situation?
중국에 지금까지 너무 많은 걸 의존하고 있었는데 중국도 요새 인건비나 어떤 그런 가격들이 올라가고 있으니까 좀 다른 시장에 좀 저희도 찾아봐야 된다고 생각해요.
이런 정치적 분쟁이 또 발생하지 않으리라는 보장이 없기 때문에 중국에 대한 경제 의존도를 좀 낮출 필요가 있다고 생각합니다.
인도나 베트남 같은 동남아시아나 가능성 큰 시장은 얼마든지 있다고 생각합니다.
새로운 시장을 개척하는 것은 쉬운 일이 아니기 때문에 지금 가지고 있는 시장을 안정화하는 것이 더 중요하다고 생각합니다.
중국의 인구가 13억이고 세계 경제 2위인데 그냥 넘어가서 안 된다고 생각합니다. 과연 우리나라가 스스로 극복할 수 있을까요? 외교적으로 잘 해결해야 될 것 같습니다.
저희 나라도 그렇고 중국 상호 의존도가 높기 때문에 동남아나 타 시장을 개척할 수 있다지만 시간이 오래 걸리는 부분이 있어서 일단은 관계 개선이 먼저 시급하다고 생각합니다.
So, Professor Kim, the views are pretty much divided right here. Some people are strongly arguing that we are over with this. No more of dependency on China. Let's move on. And others are saying that's not easy. So we have to really, solve the problem here, and then we can move on later on. But we really have to stabilize the situation. What's your overall reaction to these different views?
I think considering the size of economy of China and the growth rate, the potential future market, we agreed we are not dependent on it. Besides,
not seriously.
Besides on it. If we getting into 50% of our total exports, we might be concerned so much. But 25% up to 30%, as long as we can make money out of China business, I think it is okay.
Then how confident are you on the point that Okay, first of all, overall dependency is not that serious, and within that dependency, I think you have implied that there isn't that much of room that China can play leverage upon us because there are manufacturing ties and so on. How confident are you about China's limits in terms of, like, if China really gets really mad, are you saying that there's no way China can fundamentally damage our economic interest here?
There is a chance China is really getting into economic retaliation,
Right.
which means political, military retaliation on
Together.
Korean Peninsula.
Okay.
I think that's that issue. Because
But purely economic retaliation cannot
no,
get
it cannot
really
be because
serious.
these retaliation coming from political issue.
Right.
So they got to be solved from politically and diplomatically. It's not coming from economic issue. So economic retaliation is one of the tactical
Yeah.
issue for China economy can handle it.
I
So
see.
which means as long as a Korean company and as long as the Korean economy has the responding strategy or
Right.
tactical reaction to it,
Right.
I think we can overcome
Okay.
these economic retaliation.
That's encouraging and optimal perspective right there here. Professor Yang, I'm sure we have a lot to say about the overall magnitude of actual China's impact. The first opinion that was expressed in the video, we are over with this, gotta move on. Got to find different markets. Let's reduce the dependency on China. How realistic do you think that view is? What can Korea do in terms of moving away from?
The largest trading partner that a country has depends on the size of the GDP and distance. So that means China will probably always be our largest trading partner.
Always.
Always. But the magnitude can change somewhat. And as the Chinese economy seems to be leveling somewhat, Korea should be doing this anyway, but we're exploring new markets. The Vietnam market has gone up tremendously in the
Right.
last 5 years, so
Right.
that now they're taking account of 7% of our exports. I think the key here is, well, we should always be exploring new markets.
Right.
We should be looking at which countries have rapidly growing economies right now, which countries have a large population but not yet a very high growth rate, because that's a potential market for the future,
Right.
like India, Brazil, so on. But we should also look at maintaining our technology. I think this is the biggest problem that Korea will have. Right now,
You mean maintaining the technological lead or
Lead,
edge
yes.
above or beyond
so
China's level?
we have to maintain our lead so that we can always sell technologically advanced, high value added intermediate
But how
parts.
likely is that? I mean, during the 80s, you could be called crazy if anyone was saying that Korea is going to one day catch up with Sony, Samsung is going to catch up with Sony, and Hyundai is going to catch up with Honda. But it has happened, and how sure can we be about keeping our lead before, over and beyond China? I'm pessimistic about that.
Well, we're still importing a lot of technologically advanced parts from Japan.
I see.
And we still have a significant trade deficit with Japan, so they're still keeping up ahead of us. And the problem right now is how can we maintain or put in
Right.
a business environment where technological lead can always be maintained? And
I
that's
see.
a big question.
I see.
That's a question that we've been dealing with for the last 10 years. And whatever pessimism I think we have is that we're not confident that we can make those institutional changes,
Right.
not only for government policy, but how labor and
Right.
education deals with it.
Right.
But that's the only realistic path that we have left.
Professor Kim, we cannot remain defensive here, right? We cannot try to fend off China all the time, trying to catch up with us, which means we have to open up new frontier in our economic relationship with China, meaning that we have to always be fast in moving into new areas. What are some of the areas we can focus on in terms of playing this game with China? What are the areas we should focus on jumping into in order to keep this distance, whatever we can try, from China in the future?
Yeah, let me share the good example of this Chinese economic retaliation on Samsung and LG in China battery business, battery to the car.
Right.
So in China, there is 106 manufacturers of automobiles. Last year, they applied for government subsidy, and the R&D budget for battery development. So they'd like to be number one in terms of a battery car.
Right.
And out of 106 automobile manufacturers in China, 95 companies applied for it. Only 5 companies failed to get the money from the government.
So it's a large number of companies actually got the government's money.
Yeah,
Okay.
90 automobile companies got the research money and the subsidy of the battery.
Okay.
Out of those 5 companies
Right.
are using Samsung and LG battery. Because Samsung and LG battery is what is called third level system battery, which is high tech.
Okay.
But
Okay.
China decided they'd like to have Chinese standard as a 2.0,
I see.
which is a
Which is
low
different.
level of
Yes. Right.
battery system. So they provide all the subsidy to the company
Right.
who'd like to invest on
Okay.
that system 2.0.
Right. Right.
But Samsung and the LG is a 3.0. So these are the issue what we are facing in China market. How
Okay.
we going to solve it? We have 2 options. Samsung and LG already are solding their battery system to Europe and the American market.
So it's very globally advanced.
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
And the second, when they attack China market, they have to develop on that second
Lower
degree
level.
of
Right.
battery system
Okay.
through the R&D.
I see. So various strategies need to be played out in all these areas, basically,
Yes.
as a whole. And for the interest of time, Professor Yang, we talked about possibly different markets here. How do different markets look, looking beyond China here? For now, what are the specific alternatives?
Okay, for now, the markets that we should be going after are, as I mentioned before, the larger markets tend to have larger trade shares.
Right.
And so easiest way to look at this is perhaps look at our trade share and GDP share. And one significant region that we, while the GDP share is high, our export share is fairly low, is European Union.
Okay.
Even though they have a European Union, there's still groupings of different countries.
Right.
So you have to adjust to various different
Specifications.
countries. But I tend to think that's an excuse. The
Okay.
problem with China, as well as problem with the U.S. that we had in the past, is that because they are a large market, they have a unified standard.
Right.
They're, in a sense, the lowest hanging fruit in the tree.
I see.
India, Brazil, they have a very large potential market, but they have been a large potential market for the last 50 years.
Right.
The thing is, if they do get economic reforms on the way, policy
Right.
reforms, and they have a potential, especially India, to be second China.
Right.
But it's up to them to start sparking
Right.
the economic development. But what we can do right now is to set up the infrastructure. We've already done somewhat with the Korea. India,
Right,
CEPA,
right.
FTA agreement. We have to make sure that we have infrastructure and resources so that if that market goes up, then we have
Right.
people and resources there.
Right.
But they're not popular right now. You don't see that many Koreans studying about
Exactly,
India. You don't have
exactly.
that many people studying about Eastern Europe.
Right. Professor Kim, your overall final wrap-up of this very important discussion, any one more point that you want to emphasize?
One of the big issue of this economic retaliation to China and Korea is a Lotte case.
Right.
And Lotte has been attacking China market over the last 20 years, but they failed. They failed. So they need to come up with a new strategy. They need to restructuring and reshaping China operation.
Right.
But it's very hard, it's almost difficult to exit from the China market. But the Lotte has been suffering a lot, so they need to do inside of restructuring and the reshaping of their Chinese operation. Because of this third situation,
Right.
China allowed explicitly and implicitly for Lotte restructuring their
Okay.
operation.
Right.
Recently, last week, the Lotte come up with a slogan to their closing store. We understand.
Right.
Therefore, we are waiting.
Right. Right. Okay.
I think that's one of what Korean company got to do to
Very important
respond
point.
to these
Right.
Chinese retaliation economic issue.
Even though this is a country that's being moved by the government's directives, still there is importance in terms of going out and reaching and touching the hearts and minds of the Chinese people. I guess that is
Yeah.
the main point there. Okay, I'm sure our viewers from all around the world who have been joining us here have learned a lot about this very interesting issue of China's retaliation against Korea on THAAD issue. And there are all these different dimensions of issue we could have talked about here. But for the interest of time, we have to close here. But we want to thank our guests big time for your very important contribution for understanding this important issue. Likewise, we want to ask our viewers who have joined us here to join us once again next time when we talk about all these important issues that matters for Korea as well as the world. And until then, this has been Kim Byung-ju. Thank you very much.